Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the second Socratic Club debate for the 2012-2013 academic year. The Socratic Club at Oregon State organizes religious debates between scholars for the benefit of OSU and the surrounding community. The club was founded in 1941 at Oxford University with C.S. Lewis acting as its first president. The mission of the Socratic Club is to provide an open forum for the discussion of the intellectual difficulties connected with religion and with Christianity in particular. More information on the club and essays by C.S. Lewis are available in the lobby. Please feel free to stop by the table after tonight's debate. Our website and Facebook page is another great source of information and also includes a link to our new YouTube channel, which features many videos from past debates. The web address for our website is listed on our brochures, which are available in the lobby. I'm Justin Mark, and I will be acting as tonight's moderator. The goal of tonight's debate, as usual, is to answer a question. Does morality require God? Our two distinguished speakers will each address this question in a debate-style format. The structure of tonight's debate is as follows. Each speaker will be given 20 minutes to speak in defense of his chosen position. Next, there will be 20 minutes of discussion during which the speakers may ask questions of one another. Next, questions will be taken from the audience for about 45 minutes. Those 45 minutes tend to pass quickly, so I suggest forming your questions carefully, perhaps writing them down during the debate. We will close a little before 9 o'clock with a 2-minute closing statement from each speaker. Our first speaker tonight is Dr. Michael Gurney. Dr. Gurney holds a PhD from Aberdeen University-Highland and is a professor of philosophy and theology at Multnomah University. Among his current research interests are exploring the historical interaction between philosophy and theology, particularly in the early modern period, developing a realist theistic epistemology in light of postmodern critical theory, and advocating a Christian ethic that is publicly plausible and relevant. This will be Dr. Gurney's 5th appearance at the Socratic Club. Please welcome Dr. Gurney to the podium.
Good evening. Good evening.
Good evening. Good evening.
Thanks for, I want to thank the Socratic Club for inviting me. This is my 5th time, and it's always an enjoyable experience. I thank Dr. Dacey for willing to participate, and I thank you for coming. I hope you'll find tonight's discussion and debate stimulating and even enlightening. In addressing the question of whether morality requires the existence of God, I'm going to argue that morality is in fact ontologically dependent on the existence of a transcendent and moral personal entity that is best satisfied by our common conception of God. Now allow me to clarify my contention by first pointing out what I am not asserting. What I'm not saying is that belief in God is necessary to be moral. I know many atheists and non-believers who are quite moral. So that's not my issue. My specific contention in this debate is what I take to be a more profound claim, that the existence of morality itself, namely the objective and real existence of moral goods, virtues, and principles, are ontologically dependent on God's existence. Let me first outline my argument for this claim, and then, given my time constraints, I will focus on what I take to be a secondary concern in this debate, rebutting alternative, naturalistic accounts and explanations for morality. First, my overall argument. 1. The phenomenon of morality is best accounted for in terms of objective moral principles and values. 2. Naturalism cannot offer an adequate and plausible account for objective morality, nor any obligation we might have in regard to the existence of such ontological oddities. 3. The most plausible and adequate explanation for objective morality is one that references a personal, moral agent who is the transcendent and objective source of goodness, justice, and love. 4. This description of a personal moral agent is best satisfied in reference to a personal God. Now it seems to me that if one wants to reject a theistic account and grounds for morality, there are several options available that can serve as potential defeaters for theistic morality. One such option, a potential defeater, is simply to deny the existence of objective morality. A particularly popular option is moral relativism. Now, while moral relativism, especially conventionalism, and conventionalism is the claim that society determines what's right and wrong, while that's very popular, most moral philosophers, including many naturalists, reject conventionalism and moral relativism because they have significant problems. For sake of time, I'll just mention three. First, what is known as the moral reformer's dilemma. If conventionalism is true, then those who would take the great moral reformers, and I think of a good example, Martin Luther King Jr., who we just celebrated commemorating his life yesterday. Martin Luther King Jr. would not be a moral hero according to conventionalism. Why? Because if morality is defined by society, and individuals like Martin Luther King Jr., who are moral reformers, are trying to change society's mores, then instead of acting virtuously and morally, they are actually immoral, given their failure to conform to society's standards. I think such a supposition strikes most of us as clearly false. A second problem for conventionalism is defining what exactly constitutes a society. This is not mere philosophical nitpicking, but a point of great practical importance. For example, I am a member, or I think I am, a member of the human species, a member of the Anglican Church, an American citizen, a citizen of the state of Oregon, on faculty at Multnomah University. So I belong to a number of different societies. And as often happens, there are conflicts between the mores of those various societies. So which society dictates what's right and wrong? Or applied more broadly, what happens when one sovereign society wants to impose its morality on another sovereign society? For instance, when the Allies in World War II put Nazi leaders who were involved in the Holocaust on trial. According to conventionalism, that's problematic. Or what relevance and binding obligation is there to such documents as the Declaration of Human Rights that's been delineated by the United Nations? In summary, what determines which society trumps all other societal obligations? A third problem for conventionalism is that as a moral theory, it seems to make morality merely a matter of conforming to society's moral rules. This seems to me to be inadequate as a moral theory in a number of respects. For instance, an adequate moral theory should offer guidelines for promoting virtue and developing moral character. But according to conventionalism, being moral is merely a matter of conforming to the moral dictates of one's society. This also raises the prominent question that all moral theories need to address, and which conventionalism seems to neglect. Why be moral? A second option in rejecting moral objectivism is emotivism. This moral theory is a natural implication of naturalism, pardon the pun. So allow me to offer first a brief definition of naturalism. Naturalism is the claim that reality can be comprehensively reduced to and described by the laws of nature, namely the laws of chemistry and physics. If naturalism is true, then God either does not exist or he's metaphysically irrelevant. Emotivism was advocated most earnestly by atheist philosopher A.J. Iyer, who argued that morality, due to naturalism, lacks any rational and meaningful substance, and therefore moral claims are to be reduced to psychological states and associated emotive responses. I think most, irrespective of their belief about God, find this proposal troubling. The emotive view seems to reduce moral discourse, and especially disagreement, to be merely a matter of personal subjective preferences, analogous to disputes over the best flavor of ice cream. While morality does involve emotional responses, especially on ethical issues that people hold with great passion, it does not follow that moral disagreement can be reduced down to a clash between subjective emotional states. Take, for example, the contentious and often passionate debate over abortion. If emotivism is correct, then there really is no substantive rational disagreement to be considered. Just differing emotional responses to the topic of abortion. This seems to me to be reductionistic and clearly false, given that rational arguments and appeals to empirical considerations are utilized on both sides of the debate. For these reasons and several others that I don't have time to address, conventionalism and emotivism fail as adequate alternatives to objective morality. These problems attending to conventionalism and emotivism conjoin with the observation that most people, if not all, including moral relativists and emotivists, live as if there are objective moral principles and duties, to which we are obligated to follow and expect others to adhere to as well. This suggests that moral objectivism enjoys both rational and experiential support. For example, who isn't morally outraged when one hears a news story reporting children who've been neglected and even abused by their parents? Why? I take it's because we all have certain intuitions and expectations that parents have a moral duty to their children, namely to do no harm and to take care of their children's needs to the best of their ability. And that a particular family's ethnicity, society, culture, etc., are irrelevant in terms of having these duties. This suggests to me that these expectations and intuitions are best explained in terms of our awareness and presumption about objective morality. Now, a third naturalistic alternative to theistic ethics would seem to at least endorse an objective element to morality, and that is ethical egoism. That is morality defined by enlightened self-interest. This view has been popularized by the writer Ayn Rand and her objectivist ethic. I take various versions of ethical egoism to ground their approach in a naturalist understanding of human nature and need, which is then conjoined with the observation that people frequently operate out of self-interest. While I agree that it does seem to be the case that people are motivated by self-interest, does it necessarily follow that people should always and primarily act out of self-interest? Now, some ethical egoists would go so far as to claim that we cannot do otherwise. They would claim that all of our motivations and intentions and moral attitudes and actions are in fact self-interested, even to the point of denying genuine altruism. But I find such a claim dubious as to its denial of genuine altruism, and I think further it has a hard time explaining such duties as that of parents with respect to their children. And the fulfillment that we seek in instances of genuine friendships, where self-interest is often constrained and negotiated in complex social relationships. Additionally, it seems difficult for ethical egoists to say why narcissism is morally problematic. Finally, to universalize ethical egoism as a prescriptive model for morality poses, I think, a practical problem, since the promotion of the self-interest of others may conflict with the satisfaction of one's own self-interest. So I think ethical egoism suffers from some serious difficulties that call into question its adequacy as a moral theory. A more recent view is known as evolutionary ethics. This view looks to biological theory of evolution as a fully sufficient description and account of human nature and behavior, and thus infers a prescriptive moral theory grounded in such an analysis. Given the relative newness of this moral theory, there is considerable debate even among its proponents, and consequently there are various permutations of this approach. Probably the most vexing issue for proponents of evolutionary ethics is trying to develop an objective morality based solely on biology. Michael Ruse, a philosopher of science who is a committed Darwinist and one who's given much thought and reflection to evolutionary ethics, admits the following, quote, "What I believe is that claims of normative ethics are like the rules of a game. In baseball, it is true that after 3 strikes, the batter's out. But this claim does not have any reference or correspondence to absolute reality. What right have I to say, as an evolutionist, that normative ethics has no foundation? I have argued that normative ethics is a biological adaptation, and I would argue that as such, it can be seen as having no being or reality beyond this. We believe normative ethics for our own biological good, and that is that." End of quote. Can we realistically develop a normative objective ethic grounded in biological adaptation and the need for survival? I think Ruse's observations, among others, discourages such a conclusion. As Patricia Churchland, a prominent naturalist philosopher who has specialized in philosophy of mind has noted, quote, "Boiled down to the essentials, A nervous system enables the organism to succeed in the 4 F's: feeding, fleeing, fighting, and reproducing. The principal chore of nervous systems is to get the body parts where they should be in order that the organism may survive. Churchland then goes on to say, truth, whatever that is, definitely takes the hindermost. End of quote. I think Churchland's stark but clear-headed analysis raises further questions about the plausibility of ethical naturalism. Given the naturalist description and account of human cognition and associated mental states and activities, how can we confidently ground our ethical systems in reason and reality, and therefore claim that our ethical positions are normative and true? I take this to be especially important since moral discourse often involves rational agents seeking to show that their moral viewpoints and positions on varied ethical issues are true and therefore ought to be adopted. While I think this significant consideration takes us a little bit beyond the scope of this present debate, I think it's still relevant and worthy of mention. In all of these naturalistic alternatives that I've raised, how can a proponent of any of these alternative moral theories rationally establish their moral claims and theories as in fact true? I'll leave that question as it stands, but let me conclude by noting that none of these 4 approaches to ethics have been adequate in terms of offering any sort of objective moral norms. Now, I know that some proponents of ethical naturalism would likewise reject these approaches, and yet insist that there are natural grounds for objective morality. I believe this to be Dr. Dacey's position, and we'll find out, as he appeals to the work of John Stuart Mill and his utilitarian approach. Mill's approach is to base ethics on a universal ethical hedonism, namely whatever produces the greatest amount of happiness for the greatest number of persons. Now, one, I think, can develop a utilitarian approach that is not strictly a species of ethical naturalism. So that's why I didn't address this earlier. But let me make a couple of points, and I hope we can dialogue more about this later, on the virtues and weaknesses of a naturalistic version of a utilitarian ethic. First, a critical supposition in defining what constitutes a higher pleasure or good or I should say this, a critical supposition in this is what constitutes a higher pleasure or good in such consequentialist considerations. This was the focus of much of Mill's work and reflection in his revisions of Jeremy Bentham's earlier utilitarian model. It seems to me that a naturalist approach is inadequate for discerning and determining what are higher goods and pleasures. Given naturalism, what non-arbitrary grounds can one provide that it is indeed better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a pig satisfied? Now, I think we would agree about what many of those better goods and pleasures are, but that misses the point. The problem as I see it is that there are some notions about human dignity and flourishing that are smuggled into this account that cannot be defended and sustained solely on naturalist grounds. Second, appealing to what provides happiness for most has been proven to be very difficult in terms of implementation, especially on a socio-political level that upholds and affirms justice for all. While I think this problem is not sufficient as a defeater for utilitarianism, as an ethical theory, I remain unconvinced that such a notion as justice and happiness can be adequately defined in strictly natural terms. And like I said, I hope we can dialogue more about that. So, let me offer a brief reflection in conclusion. Morality appears to apply to and require moral agents who are persons with cognitive, volitional, and moral capacities. In other words, we don't attribute morality to impersonal objects. If this is reasonable, then it would seem difficult, in my view, to attribute the origin of morality to something other than a personal source that likewise necessarily possesses cognitive, volitional, and moral capabilities. And if such a personal source is to transcend the particularities of various cultures and historical perspectives, and require moral agents specific moral duties to to which all are obligated to follow, what plausible candidate, other than God, can a reasonable inquirer appeal to? I know that there are some objections to theistic morality, and I hope that I can address some of those objections during our time of dialogue. But I would contend that whatever objections may be raised against the theist proposal that morality is ontologically dependent upon God, these objections are far less onerous in comparison to the significant problems posed by ethical naturalism. Thank you for your time.